still join and that's okay. But we can get going. So, okay. Welcome everyone. I appreciate you all being here today. I think it's been almost a year since we've seen each other. I know most of you, if not all of you, were on part of the process last time, so appreciate you being willing to do this again. This grant cycle is a little bit different than the last one, so we'll kind of get into the differences a little bit as we go through it. I think Dan just got on, so welcome Dan as well. Just a couple of housekeeping items before we go through, and then I'll do a short roll call just to make sure everybody's here. This is a public meeting, just a reminder. So it is being recorded. And because of that, the chat has been turned off. And the reason why is because we leave the chat on, we then have to read everything into public record. And so it's just easier for us if we keep it off. We are here today to get funding recommendations from y'all, and we're then going to take these recommendations to the commission later on in this month, the 24th of November, for funding. And then the hope then is to get contracting going shortly after that, and get contracts out by the end of the year. That is the plan. And then just a reminder, public comment will be available at the end of the meeting. And so if you are a member of the public, you will have the opportunity to speak. It will be at the end. So for the duration of this particular meeting, I will be commenting and making my comments towards GAC members. And so if you are, like I said, if you are a member of the public and you do have something to say, you will have the opportunity to do that. It will just be at the end. Okay, really quickly, if you all GAC members, I'm going to just call out names if you all just want to say here. That would be lovely. If you'd like to introduce yourself, you can. I think at this point we're pretty familiar with everybody in this group, but if you'd like to introduce yourself, go ahead. I don't think there's anybody that is new. Ryan Downing. I thought I saw you, Ryan. I think you're muted.
Okay, how's that?
That's perfect.
Okay, I'm here.
Okay, were you here? You were here. You were involved in the last one, correct? Is
Yes,
that right?
ma'am.
Okay,
Yep.
perfect. Well, welcome. Melanie. I think you're muted still, Melanie, as well. Okay, I'll come back to you. Dan, I think Dan got on, is here.
Yep, I'm here, Dan Hoover, Addiction Medicine Doc at OHSU, and I lead the jail technical assistance funded by the Opioid Settlement Board.
Perfect. And you've been with us since the very, very beginning of this entire thing. So welcome. Moxie, I believe you're here by phone. Zach, you don't have to, Moxie, if it's too difficult for you to unmute, that's okay. We've marked you here.
I can just say hi real quick. I'm an addiction medicine and internal medicine physician. I specialize in addiction and I do a lot of psychiatry for people who are unhoused. I work for Peace Health in Eugene and I'm the public policy chair for Oregon Society of Addiction Medicine. And I'm a commissioner with ADPC, but I'm not representing them today.
Perfect. Thank you, Moxie. And you've also been here, I think, from the beginning as well. Orion?
Hi, everyone. I am here, Orion McCotter. I like him and he pronouns, and all hazards manager for carceral settings with Oregon Health Authority. So excited that you guys are able to do this again and supporting our jails.
Yeah, perfect. Mitch?
Hey everybody, Mitch Doig with the ADPC.
Oh, you're muted, Mitch.
Oh, does that work? Oh, okay.
Yep.
Mitch Doig with the ADPC.
Perfect. Thank you, Mitch, for being here. And then Grant.
Yeah, hi, Grant Hartley, Metropolitan Public Defenders up in Multnomah County.
Perfect. All right. Once again, thank you all for being here today. We're gonna go through this first kind of part. We do have a schedule. This is part of the agenda that was posted. This is a very loose schedule. And I don't, this isn't a very long meeting. I don't anticipate the review process taking, if you all remember, it didn't take the entire time last time either. So we do have a scheduled break at 3, and I will try my hardest to remember that there is a scheduled break at 3. But if you all, need to take a break or something like that, please just, chime in and we can do so. I do at the end, I don't have a slide for it, but I do at the end, kind of the next steps, we'll go through that. And then I do specifically want feedback from you all, on something that is not necessarily related to the applications themselves, but related to the grant cycle in general. So, oh, Melanie, I'm sorry. I forgot to go back to you. Go ahead, Melanie. You're still muted. I can't, you're unmuted. I just can't hear you. No, still can't. Do you want us to come back and try? Okay. Melanie, it may help. I don't know what your setup is, but sometimes it helps to get off and come back on. So if you need to do that, you can. So anyways, what I was saying is at the end, we would like some feedback on just one thing in particular that has to do with kind of the cycle of the grant rather than the applications themselves. So I do want to make time for that, but otherwise, the review process is going to be very similar to what it was last time, just because this is a formula grant. So pretty loose schedule. For this particular grant, I know some of you have been on other grant review committees or been involved in other grants with the CJC. This one is a formula grant. And so I don't know if any of you all have experience with the competitive grant process. It is a little bit different because it is a formula. And so the staff has a review process that's grounded in unallowable expenses, which we'll kind of get into that a little bit. And then also looking specifically at what is required for eligibility. And so today we're just asking you all to provide some constructive feedback to the applicants. As we all kind of know, this is still a pretty new program. We did do a pilot program that lasted a year. This is the first time they're going into one that's going to be a full biennium. And so any sort of feedback specifically to their programs would be incredibly helpful. And then we will go through their funding requests. We do have, staff has a couple of questions that we would like your feedback on in particular, just because this grant, and we'll get into it in a few slides, is pretty narrow in terms of what they're able to ask for. And then the commission meeting on the 24th, they will then consider your funding recommendations, and then they'll make those ultimate funding decisions. So that's where we're at today. I just want to put this up here. This is in all of our presentations. Conflicts of interest. I know in the past we've had kind of a different approach to this, and I know some of you have reached out specifically regarding this. But as we go through these applications, we're just going to ask that you kind of self-identify your own conflicts rather than staff, because I think in the past we've been a little bit more involved in that process. We're just asking that you all self-identify any particular conflict as it relates to these definitions. And if you feel like you fit into those definitions or those situations, we just ask that you mute yourself and go off camera and just not participate in any part of the discussion. And then once that's over, you can then rejoin the discussion. Dan.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel, for talking about the conflicts of interest. I had a question because I'm providing technical assistance to approximately like 9 or so of these facilities, and there's not direct like financial impact on me related to any one single facility, but I am grant funded to do the technical assistance, and the Eastern Oregon CCO is funding some of that. So I just wanted to ask how we're going to consider that.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So this is one of those, this is kind of one of those, it's part of the new approach. It's really just whether or not you feel as though you have a conflict in the discussion. You can wait and see kind of, I don't think on I think maybe the first one, you may have one, because we are going in alphabetical order, but if you want to get a sense of how we're presenting and what information we're presenting with the first one, then maybe it'll give you a little bit more clarity as to whether or not you can provide that feedback, because it's really just any sort of feedback with regards to their program operations or anything that they can do with their funding requests, those kinds of things. So I'm going to kind of leave it up to you, Dan, which is probably a frustrating non-answer, as to how you want to approach that.
I think I will probably just, like, I'm not personally and financially tied to the facilities, and my funding is to do technical assistance in general for a lot of facilities. So I think I will just plan to participate
Okay.
without
Okay.
abstaining then.
Okay. Perfect. All right. Any other questions or concerns, comments on this particular slide? Okay. Just kind of to give you an overview of the current status of the program, most of you know that this came from HB 4002 in 2024. This particular grant program was established within that bill. This year, there's a little bit of a bump in funds. Last time there was 10 million available. This time there's 10.125 available. The eligible recipients, as they're defined in the bill, are still the same. So it's cities and counties that operate a local correctional facility, and then federally recognized tribes in Oregon that operate a tribal correctional facility. With the tribal correctional facilities, it does require a set aside. We didn't identify any operating tribal correctional facilities, and so there wasn't a set aside for that group in particular. And so all of the 10.1 million went to cities and counties that operate a local correction facility. So, and then they're also able to submit a joint or individual application. We do have one that is Norcor that is a joint, and then we did have one other joint application that we'll get to as well. I did want to mention this just because this is going to be part of our analysis. And so Senate Bill 236 in the last session expanded the eligibility language, and the bolded piece is what was added. And so essentially what that did was captured transition centers as being eligible applicants for this. And so for those of you that may be unfamiliar with what a transition center is, it's essentially, and this is kind of a broad definition, so there might be some nuance, but it's a facility that provides minimum security residential, kind of a residential environment or residential treatment that can help individuals who are on supervision transition to a more independent living situation, transition to employment, transition to getting access to education, and this is usually their community service can come with it, court-ordered fines can come with it as well, and so this definition was expanded. CJC in August, right before the solicitation was released, filed temporary rules to add this to the definition of correctional facilities. And so once we get through this process, we wanted the temporary rules in place so that we could allow for those centers to be eligible to apply for funds. And once this process goes through, we get contracts out, we'll go back in and make those temporary changes permanent. So any questions on this? Change in eligibility or the expansion of this language, or any questions on transition centers or anything like that? Okay. This is the application requirements. This is, oh, Moxie, did you have a
And
question?
if you have just a sec, I wondered what age group the grants apply to now. Is it still adults only? Thanks.
Yes, yes. Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, thank you for that clarification. Yes, this is just transition centers who house adults. So thank you for that, Moxie. Okay, so grant or application requirements. This is very straightforward. This is in the bill. They do have to operate a local correction facility. They do have to have an existing or planned coordination with a provider, a treatment provider for a program. And then how they align with or intend to align with best practices and standards of care. And then there's also the last two bullet points require very specific letters from the facility saying that they're going to only request funds which we'll get to in just a second, that are allowed, and that they do have support to run a program. And so what we tried to do with the first three bullet points is capture these answers in the application questions. As we went through them, we made sure that they answered the questions appropriately and that they met these eligibility criteria. And then eligible expenses. And so this is also pretty specific. I think you all may remember this from last time. This is what they can ask for. This is also in the bill. And so the little bit of wiggle room provided is kind of that last bullet point where they may be able to ask for things that are outside of those first four. We did at this point, I would like your all's feedback. I know last time we had the electronic health records requests. They were a little bit outside of or could have fit into the last bullet point. And so we got your all's feedback on allowing those requests. The two that we got this time, the two big ones that we got this time, that we would just like to, we thought they were okay as staff when we analyzed it, but would like to get your feedback in going through this, is housing and transportation. And so if any of you all have, and they were essentially explained as kind of fitting under that last bullet point where it does allow for a little bit of interpretation of what they're asking for. And so if any of you all have any sort of insight or opinions on whether or not housing or transportation is appropriate, an appropriate ask for this grant program, we would appreciate it.
Can I just clarify, when you're talking about housing and transportation, for transportation, you're largely talking transportation to like administration, facility and back. And for housing, it would be for those transition centers, or I guess the housing one I'm sort of unclear, and then if you could just clarify the transportation.
Yeah, no, that's great. So the housing is actually transitional housing. So it's not in a transition center. It's actually setting them up in transitional housing, such as like an Oxford House type situation. And so the kind of this idea of the transitional services, those wraparound services that are provided, right? So when they get out, it is part of that's the justification for it, is it provides that support. The transportation is that, so it is some of the requests for transportation to get treatment. There were some requests specific to bus passes in the idea that it would then allow them to continue to get to their medication once they transitioned out of the jail. And so we had a couple of those requests. But no, it wasn't housing in terms of they're in a transition center. It was actual housing opportunities. Does that clarify for you, Grant?
Yes, it
Okay.
does.
Orion, I think you were next.
Thank you. I just did want to offer that I was supportive of that. I think these are some of the structural barriers that really exist. And I think, when we talk about transitional centers, we we really have those in only a very few select places in the state. There's a couple in Portland Metro, Salem, and Jackson County that I'm aware of. And so some of the applications that I saw that were talking about supportive housing were in places where there wouldn't be a transition center, so there's not that kind of same sort of support that's available. But
Okay, and just to clarify, Ryan, you think it does fit under that last bullet?
I think that, yeah, the
Okay.
housing and additionally the transportation to seek services really fits into some of the structural barriers that are going to keep people from being able to maintain treatment, especially at the time that they're released.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for that. Dan?
Yeah, I'm also supportive of this. Just gonna say that the continuation rate after a jail release on these medications can be unfortunately low just because of all of the barriers people face. So I'm excited to see grantees taking, making planning strides to help with all of this and like wrap around. I think it could also be context dependent, like if there was a jail that really was not providing much in terms of the program inside the jail, I might say, hey, prioritize the staffing and the medicine and things inside of your facility, and then look for other partners to fund transitional services because there are more funding sources available for that sort of thing in the community, but all the funds are scarce right now, right? So
Mhm.
I kind of trust the applicants to identify that.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so those are the only things we identified as staff as just getting clarification on as to whether or not they fit into this. If there's anything as we go through this where there is questions or you all have I don't know, need clarity on, just ask us and we can have that conversation. Okay, so this solicitation, this 2025 solicitation. So we had 23 correction facilities apply for funding. We had 21 last time apply, and we ended up with 19 signing contracts. And so we do have an increase in the number of applicants. With a little over 7.1 million requested in funds. Most of those, not surprisingly, were personnel, supplies. Those were the bulk of the ask, and then direct services just came in a little bit under those asks as well. And so most of the facilities have established programs. There are a few that are in the planning stages or have kind of indicated this is what we will be doing. And so we marked them in the planning stages. They may have something in place in terms of giving medication while in it, but we couldn't really identify if they had a full program. And so we've kind of marked them as planning. If we go through this and this is something that you all have more information on or can provide insight on, that would also be really helpful. And so, like I said, most of them were personnel, supplies, and then direct services. I just wanted to touch on this really quickly. If you remember, this is a funding, it's a formula grant. And so this was what we established as the formula itself the last time. We didn't change anything. We went with the same elements and the same weighting because we didn't really run into any sort of issues as we went through the pilot program last year. And so we kept it the same. The commission approved it as the same. The only thing to note with this is that 10% rural set aside did increase a little bit. The number of rural facilities did not increase. So there were still 16, but the rural set aside itself just increased slightly. And so that those more money went to those facilities this time than last time. So compared the funds that were allocated to each facility was a little bit different based on that increase in the overall funds available and then that rural set aside. And I know this is a very crowded slide. I understand that. We just all try to fit it on the same one so you can see, but I wanted you all to have the opportunity to look at this. The Clackamas TC and the Washington TC are both transition centers that opted in. We did reach out to all of the active transition centers that we felt met that eligibility. And these are the two that indicated that they wanted to apply. And so they're in there as new applicants. And then we do have a couple other applicants that applied. We'll go through those as we go through those. But you can see this is for all of the counties. And so they were allocated. And so because not all of the counties applied, we will, that's where that shortage comes from between the 7.1 and the 10. So we will have funds left over. Any questions on this? I know this is like a pretty crowded slide. Also, Springfield, again, I just want to note that one is the city of Springfield. It's the city jail that we identified. Okay. So today's review process is kind of two parts. So the staff analysis was grounded in the grant purposes that are outlined in the solicitation and the bill. We also relied on the OARs to guide us. We also looked at prohibited expenses through our internal process that's been published in our grant administration guide. And again, this isn't a competitive grant, it's formula. And so what we're asking for is kind of the completeness of the answers in the application, any sort of feedback with the program itself in terms of operations. I do know that the last time we did this, you all had some fantastic feedback to these programs. It has been a year. Most of the ones that applied last year are applying again. And so this could provide a good opportunity for them to kind of continue to get that guidance and that feedback from you all. And then, so we looked at kind of both of those and the responsiveness and then the quality of the answers. And we're asking you kind of to add to that and to provide feedback. The other part as well, again, we will go through their funding requests. We do have a slide on that. And kind of looking at that, see if it's appropriate. If there's anything that you all need clarity on, we can provide that as well. And so we will get recommendations from you at the end. We're not going to take a formal vote just because it doesn't require it. And so it really is just kind of looking at consensus to make sure everything makes sense as we go through these. All of them met eligibility. You'll see we have a table that was very similar to last time where they say they met eligibility. And so all of these applicants are eligible. It's really just providing feedback to them to see if they can continue to improve their programs and to make sure that their requests are appropriate. So any questions on that? I'm gonna kind of just go through these and pause. I'm not gonna read them. I'll make some, read some highlights or whatever, but I'm not gonna read them verbatim. And so gonna kind of maybe ask for like a thumbs up or something, or any sort of indication that you all are good with the application page and then the funding request, and then we'll move on to the other one. So, but please, if you have feedback, chime in. Okay. So Baker County is the first one. They are an existing program. They did receive funds last time. Again, they do meet eligibility, and they do have a provider in place. I will just note Baker County went through a transition with the person who was running the grant. There's a new person that stepped in halfway through the last grant cycle. Have had many conversations with the new person who's running it, and they're very excited about the possibility of receiving funds again and being able to continue with their program. So their allocated funds were a little over 190,000. And then this is specifically what they requested. with most of their ask going into direct services. So that's the treatment piece. So any comments or questions, feedback for Baker County? Okay. We will continue then. Benton County, they also are returning their allocations very similar. They do have an existing program. They do have a treatment provider. They also do have this was noted in a couple of them. They have planned peer support through their family nursery, their family tree relief nursery that is in Benton County, and so just wanted to note that as well. Their letters of commitment, just always kind of like to give them accolades when I can. Was especially particularly using the grant funds was very thorough. It was one of the more robust letters of commitment, so I just wanted to take note of that. They put a lot of thought into that particular letter. As last time, their entire ask is medications. Any comments, questions? Grant?
Yeah, no, I appreciated this application, and this is more just a general question for moving forward on these. But as I was going through, I noticed that the costs of the injectables seem to vary dramatically in some of the applications. And I was wondering if that was something that CJC planned to work with the different counties to try to like stabilize some of those costs, or it just seems like some counties are paying 1,900 while others are paying, I think I saw one for 700, unless I got that wrong. So it was
Yes.
just more of a generalized question on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Melanie, did you have a comment? You're still muted. Let me see if it. Still can't hear you. I'm so sorry. Ryan, Melanie, we'll come back to you. Ryan, go ahead.
So I know like in our county, and I kept quiet for Baker, but I do know medication costs do change or vary per county, and where they got to order from. Baker, we were down to one pharmacy in town. We have just recently switched over to DOC. We got a little better of a price, but they're still shipping and that kind of thing. But that was one thing we struggled with was pricing. So I would assume every county is going to be a little bit different depending on where they're getting their meds, how they're getting their meds, that kind of thing.
Okay, thank you for that. Dan?
Yeah, I was just gonna say we do for the jails we're working with for technical assistance, we do try to help them obtain the best pricing or at least competitive pricing. There's different pricing depending on if they have 340B access somehow. Also, if you're looking at monthly injectable, it's going to be around 1,500 per unit, and if it's weekly, then it's about a quarter of that. So if you're seeing some that are like $400, it's probably weekly injectable that they budgeted for in that case.
Moxie? Thank you, Dan.
Yes. Over time, we keep talking about the cost of medications, and it isn't something that's transparent because a lot of the cost of meds might be about a 340B contract, which is something that's confidential usually. I don't know if it is in jails and prisons, but in community health centers, that's confidential. And then there may be more purchasing power in one location versus another, and there's shipping costs involved. So there's very strict handling regulations called the REMS program, risk evaluation mitigation strategy or something like that. So all those factors may play a role. I don't know what we could do to impact that cost, but if the state has any has the authority to require places to share how much they're paying, if that wouldn't conflict with their contracts or with federal regulations, that might help us find a way to solve these problems. Thanks.
Yeah, of course. Thank you all for that. I can just add to that, just to kind of tack on to Ryan's comments. I presented before, I think it was the sheriff, don't quote me, association, I believe, where they kind of meet jail commanders. They meet once a month. I did a presentation on this particular program before the applications were due, and had a slide talking about the DOC program and getting in touch with their pharmacists specifically, kind of to see they have a program where they can help with cost. And I know shipping is a thing that may make it a little bit more expensive, but there is a program where they can contact the pharmacist at DOC, get in touch with them, and kind of go through there. I know there's a few of these applicants that are already doing that as well. So, Orion, you just came off camera. Did you have something to add to that? You're probably a little bit more eloquent than I am.
No, I think that's probably fine. I mean, it's a very complex issue, and I think that there are a lot of issues, especially in the long-acting injectable space and some of these newer ones. The 340B is very particular, and I know that there are people within my agency that are trying to work with jails to see if they can become approved, but that really has a whole nother set of challenges that are associated with it, and it's really getting jails to certify as an STI clinic or an STD clinic. And there's also, I mean, just legally, there's a lot of complexities around that, and additionally with the DOC program. So I think that's fine.
Okay, thank you. I will say, Grant, just to kind of just to make a note, we recognize that the prices for medications were kind of all over, and so it wasn't something that we compared or looked at. We kind of just, here's what they're asking for in terms of their cost for medications, and as long as it was the appropriate medication, we were like, okay. Just for that reason of it being kind of all over the place. I don't know, maybe in the future, if it does become standardized, it's something that we can look at in terms of why there's a fluctuation, but we didn't consider that. And so, to your point, it is all over the place. We know that. And so it just was kind of like, okay, we'll take them at what their ask is. So, thank you for bringing that up, because that's something that's pretty apparent as you go through these. Okay, so any issues with Benton County's request? It's pretty straightforward. I don't think anybody has a problem. Okay. City of Springfield, again, they are an existing program. They are coming back from the pilot program as well. They do have a provider. They do have a pretty robust program within their jurisdiction. And then their request was personnel. And so the nurses and the nurse practitioner kind of overseeing and running the medication piece of their program is what they asked for. Any comments? Okay. Oh, Dan.
Yeah, I did have a comment. I just was looking at the budget, and the staff costs are high compared to the amount of injectable buprenorphine they planned for, or at least that they budgeted for. They do also give extended release naltrexone injections, and I don't know how many of those they administer like in a year to know kind of how big a volume comes in the program. But I did think about that, just like it looks like a lot of staff time budgeted for with a really small number of medications. But maybe they're budgeting for meds outside of what we're seeing, or they're getting free samples of the extended release naltrexone, because that was mentioned.
Yeah, I do want to know on this one, and this might, I don't know if this has anything to do with what you're talking about, Dan, but they actually turned in a budget projection sheet that was well over their allocated funding. And so we then asked them to adjust it. And so initially, I believe they asked for medication. I think it was replaced with the correct one. If it wasn't, we can get it to you. They initially over asked for their allocation and then came back with just a personnel request. So I'm not quite sure which one you're looking at. If you're looking at the wrong one, we can try and make sure that the correct one is in the Google Drive. And I don't know if that's what you're referring to, but I just want to point that out. Grant, go ahead.
Yeah, the focus solely on personnel also caught my attention, as well as the fact that all of these are existing positions. You know, these are not added positions for the purpose of supporting this program. It seems to be existing programs, or excuse me, existing positions that they're sort of using this grant to fund. You know, and I would, yeah, I mean, given that there is no request for any meds and the difficulty getting meds and the fact that some of the other applications are for entirely for meds, I guess I'm struggling to figure out how they plan to run this program without having a stable medication supply. And like I said, I think that the fact that these are positions that already exist at their jail and they are simply really filling that budget with the CJC also makes me a bit uncomfortable.
Okay, that's great feedback. So along with your feedback and Dan's, would it be appropriate for us to get clarification on their access to medication and what that looks like? And then maybe get more clarification on what the personnel request, how it relates to their like how it's working essentially. The other thing that we can also clarify, and I'm pretty sure this is not the case just because it's a provider, it looks like, is subplanting. I don't think these are county positions, but we can clarify that just for sake of existing positions. But yeah, so maybe if we can get some feedback or clarification on where that initial request for medication went, like what they're going to be doing. Is that something, Dan and Grant, you're okay with us getting clarification on? Perfect. Okay. Moxie.
Yes, I wondered if anyone may have said this, I might have missed it. What proportion of the budget is it all personnel, it looks like?
Yes.
Okay, and then, so my concern would just be similar to everyone else that for that amount, you could probably fund a full-time nurse practitioner 40 hours a week, all year round. And so if they don't also have funding for meds or they're not already covering that some other way, that's quite a high amount. And also a lot of the medications, injectables, can be given by LPNs and medical assistants sometimes. So I would just wonder, does a nurse practitioner have to even be there all the time, or would it be like they drop by once a week for 4 hours and see everybody? So knowing their schedule and what proportion of the schedule they're expecting us to fund would be helpful, and how they fund those positions currently. Thanks.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you for that. Orion?
Yeah, I must have been, I'm seeing, yeah, that they used to have a partnership with Ideal Options and some of the funding going there, and maybe that was the previous budget markup that I think you must have come back to them with. But yeah, I think this is going to be complicated with some of these different commercial vendors in some of the jails and how the recipients are really going to have to negotiate the contract that they're working on a full suite of treatment options, and understand that this kind of, it gets a little tricky in how the application comes through, where it's written to be staffing specifically for that subcontractee.
Okay.
But
So
I think yeah,
go ahead.
ensuring that they are providing medication and that the entire budget is not going to be spent just on the personnel.
Okay, so we will ask that. We'll make sure we'll get clarification on access to medication and what that looks like, how much medication they're actually getting. And then also to Moxie and Orion's point, these positions, right? What proportion of them are actually going into this particular program? We can definitely get clarification on that. So, Dan?
I was just gonna say we should ask for clarification if they still intend to offer buprenorphine, because if they redid the budget and said we can't afford injectable buprenorphine, I do not think that only offering extended release naltrexone is good practice, and would be concerned about that.
Okay, we can ask that as well. Thank you. Okay. Any other comments, feedback for this program? All right, thank you. Okay, Clackamas County, this is not the transition center, so just want to clarify that's coming next. They are an existing program. They are a returning applicant as well. Their allocation is a little over $300,000. They are partnered with a provider, and so they do have a program. And then the thing that just to note is that they have a goal of initiating accredited in-jail methadone unit. So this is, I think these requests are around that. And so they've asked for a number of different kinds of requests. This is one of the few. If you remember, we got a few of these last time, but the equipment asks in particular, just to make sure that they are compliant. We staff thought those were appropriate this time as well. There are a few where they're asking for remodels for specific rooms so they can have storage for medication, those kinds of things. And so the equipment in there we thought was appropriate. And then their biggest ask is also personnel. And then they also have medication and direct services. Moxie.
In general, for context, it can cost, for a freestanding OTP, it can cost about $800,000 to start one. And to start a medication unit, it can cost $250,000. A lot of the time, OTPs don't even offer injectables. So if you add up $250,000 plus the $76,000 for injectables, I would say they're just about spot on where I would expect it to cost for a medication unit plus the injectables. And that's with if you were doing it all the time, super efficient, know how to do it really well. Just for context. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for that. Appreciate it. Grant?
Thanks. Yeah. I just had sort of two clarifications, and maybe there's somebody with law enforcement on the jail side that can explain this to me. I am a little confused by the burglar alarm for DEA compliance, just given the fact that it wasn't mentioned by any other applications, and I'm not sure if I'm assuming that is methadone specific, and that is probably why, but so I don't know if anybody had any thoughts on that. The other is more of a combined Clackamas County question, which is that their jail and their transition center are both run by the sheriff's office. And so I was wondering why those came in as separate applications rather than a joint application. The biggest reason being that means admin are going to go to both of those, even though it is the same agency that is doing it, which just also seems a bit strange. So I want to air all that out.
Yeah, so if anybody wants to jump in on the burglar alarm,
Yeah.
Go ahead, Moxie.
I do. I'm so excited about it. So in the narcotic treatment program regulations by the DEA, it says that you have to have very particular types of alarms that have these Code of Federal Regulations statutes that apply to them. And so, for instance, the clinics, the methadone clinics where I worked, we had to have it ring directly to the police, things like that, or to a security agency. And so anything goes wrong, everyone knows immediately. It's sort of like having a fire alarm that goes outside your building. So it's a pretty advanced system. I don't know much about the cost of alarms, but that's where it comes from.
I get that. I mean, I guess I get that in a clinic based in the community. In a jail, that seems entirely unnecessary given that
Yeah.
it is in a jail.
Yeah.
But
Some
maybe, I
people
mean, the
don't.
DEA is not always logical. So
Yeah, we've often in addiction medicine, we've often said an OTP and a jail are already so similar that it doesn't seem like we should have to do the same things at a jail. If you have all your people secured, do you really have to secure all your meds the same way? It seems a little strange, but I think that those regulations remain, as far as I know. It's a good point.
All right, thank you. Orion.
I think I was just gonna weigh in on the same that it's really our jails that are trying to build like an OTP or mobile OTP, and we don't have those to date right now. And yeah, the DEA regulations do make it somewhat cumbersome and challenging to get there. But most of the jails that we do have a provider that's coming in to deliver methadone, and that was part of this cost in the couple that I saw.
Okay. Grant, just to address the question about seeing the individual applications versus kind of a combined one, they were both eligible, even though they're coming from the same area. It's very similar to our treatment court grant. We do allow, even if the county is the county entity is the applicant for three treatment court applications, we do allow for admin requests for all of them. It is just part of kind of what we do. And so we recognize that, and we also understand that admin can be sometimes difficult to identify. The way that we kind of capture that is on the back end with reporting. We ask for clarification. And so on the front end, it looks very broad. I think the next one you'll see says senior accountant. It says the same thing. We do try to capture it on the back end as to exactly what it is. But we do allow one entity to have multiple requests for admin and other grants, which is why we didn't flag it here. It's definitely something you all can flag if you'd like, but it's not something that they got any direction that they weren't allowed to do. So
got it. And I mean, if you know, if it's allowed, it's allowed. I will say that, both being senior accountant, I don't quite understand how, that much is needed for an accountant for a MAT program, and seeing a lot of the other counties really forego admin and put that cost into money, and both of these are the full 10% that they are allowed to have. It makes me uncomfortable. It's an explanation I would like, but at the same time, I think that what they're doing with methadone there is excellent. So nothing else beyond that.
okay, perfect. Thank you. Okay. The Clackamas County Transitional Services. This is a new applicant. I don't know how many of you had the opportunity to read and look over this application. Staff marked this as planning and kind of wanted to get a little bit of clarification. We do know that they have allocated funds, and they did ask for specifically for personnel, and they asked for administrative costs. Those were their two requests. We just want to make sure that they do have a provider, all of those things. This is just a little bit of a different type of applicant than we dealt with last time. And so we want to make sure that if there is any feedback in terms of the operations of their program within the realm of a transition center, that we capture that. Because the explanations and kind of the process and operationalization that they explained was a little bit different. They're eligible. They are allowed to get funds, they're allocated funds, all of those things. Just want to make sure there's not any sort of, we just want to see if there's any feedback that you all could provide to them as they go through this grant cycle, to make sure that they're following best practices, standards of care, and all of that. If you read it and it felt like it met it, that's fantastic. We can hear that and kind of go on. Just wanted to pause on this because it is a different kind of center. So, Dan.
Yeah, I was gonna share just a little bit of context with the committee about it's essentially like pre-treatment work that the jail does and is really collaborative and then can help fill those gaps at release that folks face. So the way I read the application is more integration between the clients on MOUD and the availability of the pre-treatment services. So having access to CADC, doing things like assessments, and then accessing treatment post-release. So it's like more staff to make that accessible to folks in the program. And Clackamas has a county-operated justice-involved person residential treatment facility that already does serve folks essentially who are like on MOUD or started onto MOUD in the jail, and then they'll release on a jail diversion kind of plan and go to, it's called CSAP, but they'll go to the Clackamas Substance Abuse Program and do residential treatment and stay on their MOUD there. But the unit in the jail, there's like a special unit in the jail where they have CADCs and they're doing some pre-treatment work. So I think this is essentially like augmenting that program. And I think earlier I saw Lieutenant Mdike on. I don't know if we're interested in asking folks on the call to clarify anything, but that's my understanding of some of the context of the program.
Yeah, at this point, we could do this I can't have any members of the public clarify, but during public comment, absolutely, 100%. So we won't move on with any sort of formal recommendation until after public comment. And so we'll do public comment at the end. If whoever you identified wants to comment, they'll absolutely be able to. And we can come back to this if there's any sort of clarification on that. So thank you, Dan, for that context. Grant.
Yeah, I mean, I guess because I actually had the privilege of going out and touring and seeing the transition center. And, when I was thinking transition centers for this, I was thinking of sort of like, the restitution center in Washington County. The transition center there is really a referral hub where individuals are released and then, are given referrals. And it's not like an alternative to jail. And it seems like, and this is not to take away from this application, because again, I think they're doing good work, but it seems like really what this is asking for is another jail-based program where essentially a transition center is going in and doing the CADC work in hopes of releasing people out. I was just wondering if the CJC was really how they were distinguishing a transition center and how this sort of fit that definition.
Yeah, so that's a great question. Basically that definition that I can go back to that language if you would like me to, but that definition with the bolded language was written specifically for these. Well, there's two transition centers in specifically that it was written for. This was one of them. And so they were flagged with that language as being eligible. And so it wasn't necessarily CJC, eligible to apply, essentially. We identified it just based on that language that came out of the statute. This was kind of I think what you're talking about, Grant, and some of the input is the issue that staff had in terms of determining what this program actually looked like. There was a pretty heavy emphasis on CBT, which I had not been mentioned in any other program. And then also there wasn't any sort of mention in the application of medication usage for their MOUD program. And so those were kind of the two things that we flagged that we just wanted clarification on. And so, Grant, to your question or inquiry, they are eligible just based on that it's by that definition, they do qualify. We did reach out. I know somebody mentioned Jackson County was another one. We did reach out to them. They said they don't have a program, and so they didn't apply. The Washington County one and this one both indicated that they they wanted to. And so we just want to clarify that the program itself is operating in a way that falls within those best practices and that standard of care. And if it's not, it's okay. It's why we also kind of flagged it as a planning applicant, right? They're in the planning stages. What do they need to do to get up to best practices or to meet the standards of care?
Yeah, and I guess my question would be is how is this not a jail-based program, right? I think that's sort of the
Yes.
question, like where is that line drawn between this? And then also, you don't need to go back to the slide, but what was the bill number for the transition center language?
Senate Bill 236.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, it's section 17. Does anybody have any sort of further comment or feedback? Orion.
Yeah, I mean, I know that the OARs and stuff on transition centers can get really tricky on like, we've dealt with this with Medicaid issues, and I don't feel skilled enough to speak to all of that. But I think this made sense to me in that people that had been coming from Clackamas jail that had been seeking treatment and had been offered and agreed to be treated were being treated, and this would be complementary to increasing improved transitions and potential other people that might be able to seek services. And I think we see the same thing when we get to the Washington one. And I think part of it is just that it's different. A transition center is going to be different than what we see as far as treatment in a jail. And whether
Mitch?
Yeah, I think one of the points of clarification I'm really curious about is more in terms of process. They're asking for funding a CADC, but like under the MIUD grant, but if anybody's involved in CODA for those MIUD services, they should have received that screening in advance of that. So I'm just sort of like struggling, is this to capture people who don't engage while they're in jail and then release and change their mind? Like that's a big point of question for me.
Yeah, yes. All of these things are things that we also kind of identified as that, like, Dan, maybe you can help out. These are things that staff also flagged as well that we're kind of looking for clarification on, or feedback that we can provide to them, and just as they are kind of in this planning stage, what they need to continue to do. So Dan, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was going to share like the work of what they're describing and engaging with individuals is actually in the jail. So the staff who go into the jail to do the work, I believe, are organizationally under the umbrella of the transition center, but maybe that's generating some confusion. But the program that's mentioned about pre-treatment is programming in jail. And at one point it was like I think it was a certain housing area that was cohorted for this, although I don't know if that's the latest.
That was the case when I was just there frequently. They show that kind of like a treatment readiness area. And then, sorry, I'm struggling to find the definition in section 17. So maybe I mean, because it says local correctional facility, I don't see anything in there about a transition center or any of that language. So maybe
Yeah, I believe that's the ORS 114.087 that they quote in there is that expansion.
Oh, 144.087, that one?
Yeah. That's the ORS that expands that definition.
I see. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Because originally it just quoted the one ORS that just defines correction facilities, and then it expanded it. So, okay. So just to kind of get back to this, we're going to keep this as a program in the planning stage. Okay. We recognize that it's a bit different. We recognize I think we've established that there is a program. Dan, go ahead.
Sorry, I just wanted to clarify why we defined it in planning stage. I think the program is operating, but my understanding was they intend to expand the program with the CJC funds.
Yeah, so yes, but I guess we flagged it as a planning program, and if you disagree, we can change it. We flagged it as a planning program because we wanted to make sure that it was different from the one that we just reviewed, because it sounds like they're getting treatment to Grant's point, they're getting treatment inside the jail. We did flag the fact that there isn't any sort of reference for medication for MOUD anywhere. There's kind of a heavy emphasis on CBT. And then also to Dan or to Mitch's point, I'm sorry, is about kind of the assessment process and when that is actually occurring. And so those were things that we flagged. If you all disagree, that's fine. If you think this is a program that doesn't require any feedback, that's also okay. We just wanted to make sure that this particular program and the way it's described is meeting best practices and standards of care. Essentially is what we need to know as staff. If it's not, is there any specific feedback that we can provide to them? Moxie.
A couple of things are coming up for me with these reviews. One is that I don't have a strong sense or experience or knowledge of administrative costs and what percent of a grant should go to administrative costs. But I do think grant adherence and management is really complex, especially in this area with controlled substances and risk and addressing diversion and all these things and medication storage. It can be very time consuming. So I've had that happen, but I don't know altogether how much of a budget it usually represents. The other concern I would have is just people who are very well versed in therapy and group counseling, and people who are CADCs. They'll often approach addiction as though you could do therapy or group work first. But I think that to be able to participate in therapy or groups, our patients often need medications because they're so uncomfortable and they can't focus, and their cravings derail their motivation. And so fairly often. So I think that to expect therapy and other types of behavioral health to succeed, we would need to see it, holistically paired with medication, even if it's just planned out, like where they're going to look for community partners. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Moxie, that's great feedback. Any other comments, questions, clarifications for this program? Any other feedback you want us to provide? Okay, we will move on. Thank you all for that discussion. Clatsop County, they have an existing program. They are also a returning applicant. They do have a provider, and I think these are the ones, yes, they have the contingency management incentive, that pilot that's in partnership with OHSU. Dan, I don't know if that's you. I don't think it is, but they did mention that. Is that you, Dan?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's Dr. Peng is the PI, but I'm
Gotcha.
assisting, and it's opioid settlement board funded research
Perfect.
essentially,
Okay.
but there's an intervention that's being paid for as well. Yep.
Perfect. Yeah, I believe this is the only applicant that mentions that specific program. And so most of their request is medications and contingency management. They do have a request in direct services, and then they do have an admin request as well. Grant.
I love that they're doing the contingency management. That's huge. What I will say is I was a little confused by their budget note on it because they mentioned, these other educational material, Narcan, hygiene items, minor office supply. I I don't know. I guess I would have liked to have seen what they were spending on contingency management versus these other supplies. And I think, frankly, given that they're the only ones really doing contingency management, which is also sad, it would be really great to know how much they put towards it and really how much of a benefit that showed. So to the extent they can carve that out, I think it would be helpful.
Okay, yeah, we can definitely get that feedback and clarification from them for sure. Dan.
They are likely involved getting the Save Lives Oregon Clearinghouse allocation for naloxone, but we should also check with them about that because Save Lives Oregon would like every jail, I think, to enroll to get naloxone. So they may want additional naloxone still. I just saw it was in that comment also.
Okay.
And Grant, we're also excited about the research findings, and we need to do the research, and then we'll be excited to disseminate it. We're in like the planning of the research study.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay. Any other comments, feedback for Clatsop County? Okay. Crook County, they are an existing, they have an existing program. They are a returning applicant as well. And they do have a provider. They did note that medications are administered in jail under correction staff supervision, but they do have a provider. And then their request was mostly in personnel as well as direct services. And I just want to note this is the first time we've done this, and so if there's any confusion, please ask us to clarify. But we asked, even if they were doing something where it was a provider, if they were asking for personnel, we asked them to move it to personnel instead of in direct services. We used to have a contractual services section, trying to get an indication of an FTE for a person so that we know that they're actually spending the appropriate amount of time in that program, which is why some of the personnel requests are providers, if they're not necessarily county or jail personnel. And so that's kind of the difference there. And then the direct services, we try to keep very specific to anything related to treatment or the transition. So that I just wanted to clarify that. I'm sorry, I should have done that earlier. But this is kind of a good example of some personnel that's not necessarily county or city employee. Grant.
Yeah, the personnel section is what kind of confused me, so I'm glad you read that. But for one, they're listing like a full FTE, like 100%, but the amounts are clearly not a full FTE. So I was a little confused by that. And then it was also sort of the same thing, the concern I had with Springfield as well, is that it doesn't look like they're necessarily, I mean, at least from this, that they're expanding personnel for this, but instead that these are all existing personnel that this is coming in to fill. And so I would want to know, like, you know, how this is going to be a deviation from the practice that these existing personnel would already do, and why that should be funded, if that makes sense.
Yep. Yeah. Okay. We can get clarification on that. I will note, Grant, you pointed out a frustration of staffs as well with the 100%. That percentage of time per month is oftentimes interpreted as it's interpreted differently among counties, and so we try to get clarification on that as best we can. Sometimes we rely more on the math making sense with the FTE than we do that percentage, and so we've also experimented with that section many times, and so that feedback from you all that it is confusing on your end as well is helpful for us to continue to kind of figure out how to best reflect that. So appreciate that for sure. Okay, any other feedback, comments, questions on Crook County? Okay. Deschutes County, they do have an existing program. This I believe they did not apply last time. This is their first time applying for these funds, and they do have a provider. And then their ask was direct services, just for medication, essentially, and then administrative costs. And I just want to clarify something real fast, because we may have mislabeled that. I just want to make sure. Yeah, so the direct services in Deschutes County should actually be supplies. So if you're looking at their budget request, it is in supplies. The 218 is for medication, so that should say supplies. So we'll fix that. We'll make sure that's correct when we go before the commission. Any comments? Questions? Okay. Douglas County, this is an existing program, and they do have a provider. I do want to note on this one, now that I did say that we made all the direct services personnel move up to personnel. I did ask this county to do that. I did tell them, basically we had them break out the FTE because it was a little confusing. I did ask them to move it to personnel, but I did ask them very late in this process, and so I gave them a deadline beyond this meeting. And so if you all have feedback on the FTE or on the amount, that is something that we can absolutely hear. But we will get clarification on exactly those FTEs for those people that are being requested after. I just asked them very late in this process, and so I gave them a little bit of grace with that. So I just wanted to note that anomaly within their budget, but the overall request and overall amount, there is no difference. So most of their ask, if not all of their ask, sorry, was in personnel. Grant.
Yeah, I this was kind of
Yes.
concerning. Again, it seems like they are building a program that I would just be curious where they're going to get meds,
Okay.
and how that is going to happen, and just sort of their reasoning for directing all of the funds towards several full-time positions. And I didn't see did they indicate what their jail census is?
I don't, let me look. I don't think so, but let me pull this up real quick.
Because it seems like a lot of staff for like
Yeah.
jail, let alone, yeah, so that was
Yeah, they don't when they talk about their jurisdiction, they don't mention what their census is. So we can get clarification on that. We can get clarification on the how and where they're going to dispense meds and kind of what their plan is in terms of it just being personnel for the request. We absolutely can. Yeah. And I apologize if there's any confusion on their budget sheet, but that was my fault in catching it late. So Moxie.
Yes, thanks. I think with personnel costs, it might make the most sense. I don't know if in the future it would be possible if we could ask each program to plan ahead for how much they might pay if they contract with someone per hour, and then see how many hours they actually use and only use the money per hour, so that we don't end up inadvertently, even with the best of intentions, we could end up funding like full-time medical care for any random need in a jail rather than specific to substance use. And this happens a lot with substance use disorder funding in particular, is that it gets diverted to all kinds of like filling in potholes, or school funding is super important, but it can end up going to like schools and, adding like assistance in classrooms and things like that, where I may not just loop back to dealing with like the externalized costs of addiction itself and the suffering. And so I wonder if that might be a way to audit where these funds go, so that we don't have to be overly suspicious or controlling when we give out funds, but we also don't end up just giving a really large check. Like if you were funding a large clinic with 2 nurse practitioners and an MA in a large city, you could probably fund it with this kind of personnel funding, if that makes any sense. Thanks.
Yeah, no, that's great. We try to capture that on the back end with financial reporting. And so that's great feedback to kind of look at it from, especially the contractual direct services piece, to look at it from kind of an hourly, like that lens, I think is really helpful for feedback when we're trying to capture that. So appreciate that. Orion?
Yeah, I think my comment was really what's been repeated by most here, that the personnel costs and kind of the breakdown seemed like a lot, and unclear how the rest of the program was supported with that. I'm assuming, knowing some of these contracts that specifically work for healthcare in jails, that it comes into the negotiations on what they're able to do to provide, support to build up a program. But I think it worth mentioning that. And then I think in their application, it mentions that they would provide a bridge for people needing treatment 2 weeks prior to release. And maybe I won't speak as a provider, and maybe Dan or others might speak to, might be best practice about providing treatment through duration of their treatment past any detox and care areas. All right.
Yeah, just for you all, so that you know, if you're looking at the application itself, I believe, Orion, you're referring to question 2. I think it's number 3, I think, is what you're referring to. The 2 weeks prior to release comment, I believe that's where it's at. So, Dan?
I had a question, Rachel, if you were able to clarify with the county about when it says like 2 FTE for a nurse position. I think there's like 2 of these 2 FTE positions.
Yes.
And is that because it's 2 years? So it's really like 1 FTE for a year? Is that kind of double what is actually going to be used on a daily basis because it's for 2 years and that's how they put it in?
Yeah, that's a great question. We asked them to break that out, and so there should be a version in your Google Drive that does have that. So they broke it out into 4 different requests at 1.0. Because Dan, that was equally confusing to us. So it should be in there, broken out broken up further. I think the piece that is missing that we can, if we need to, we can get clarification from y'all, is that it is in direct services rather than personnel. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then I agree with Orion about like the program design, and I also saw that there was a mention of like a detox protocol, and then around like day 10 or day 14 transitioning people onto the maintenance program, and that's a practice I try to discourage jails from doing just because the large volume of patients actually releases quickly. And so if they will have a lot of staff to serve the program, they could get people into the program a lot more quickly than waiting till they complete withdrawal to then initiate them onto buprenorphine. So there's some better ways to do it, and I'd recommend they engage in some TA to talk about a more
Okay.
streamlined approach to have like more volume into their program.
Okay. Dan, and is it appropriate to refer them to you in terms of that TA, or is
Yes,
it?
I did just recommend to refer them to myself.
Okay.
Yes.
I just want to make sure that's what you're talking about. But okay,
Yeah,
so in
my
the
team.
feedback.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. That sounds great, and we appreciate that. Okay, any other question or comments on Douglas County? Okay. Before, I know that we scheduled a break at 3. I just kind of want to check in. We're like a little bit over, maybe almost like actually kind of halfway through. This might be a good time to just maybe take a 10-minute break. And then we can come back and finish the rest of the applications, and then we have one thing that I need some feedback from y'all on. So rather than waiting until 3 to take a break, where we might be a little bit closer to the end, why don't we take a 10-minute break and come back at like 2:40, and then we'll continue. Does that work for everybody? Perfect. Okay, I'll see y'all in 10 minutes. Can you all see that presentation? Good, perfect, okay. Okay, I think everybody is back, and we can get going. Okay, so Jackson County, this is also an existing program. And they do have a provider as well. Most of their ask is in contractual services or direct services. And they did ask for, this is one of the few that asked for training. There were a couple that did. And so they asked for a little bit of training money and then an administrative cost ask as well. So any comments, questions, or feedback for Jackson County? Okay, I'm not hearing anything. All right.
Oh, I have a question.
Oh, yep.
Sorry. For
No, it's okay.
mainly, probably Dan might be the best person to ask, Dan Hoover, whether ATOD is the best training program, or is there one that's specific? I think there's like a BJA place that does a lot of jail work. So I just wondered, what's the best place for this context for training? And not that I would restrict them to use that, but it may be beneficial to them to know if there's something you recommend. Thanks.
Moxie, have you been to ATOD? I actually have not. I know it is focused toward OTP audience and that they
Yeah.
do have a OTP they're partnering with for Jackson County.
Yeah, so in that case, ATOD could be a really good fit. Although the tricky part there is that most OTPs are community based and not in jails, and I think that the I'm trying to be careful with how I word this, but I don't want to take too long either. The culture in most OTPs is surveillance based rather than centered in a therapeutic alliance or strengths based treatment of the patient. And so anything that jails could gain with regards to patient centered addiction medicine would probably go a long way. Just given the amount of trauma that the patients face by the time they get in jail and the lives that they've had as children before they get there, I think like it would probably be great to have something like trauma informed and empowering. And I worked in methadone clinics for about 8 years, and there are certainly people in those programs who do that kind of humanistic work. But there is, I think, a tendency for it to be about suspicion that the patient is going to do something wrong. So thanks.
Yeah, we can give them that feedback as well. I don't know if you have anything else to add, Dan. But we can at least give them the feedback of just being cognizant of the trauma informed training and all of that stuff for sure. Dan, did you have anything to add?
No, I wish I could say there's like a really specific jail MOUD conference, but I'm not aware of any. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Any other comments on Jackson County? Okay. Lake County, we marked them in the planning stage. And they currently don't have an in-house substance use treatment program. They do want to use these funds to kind of start that process. We did have a couple conversations with them about I don't know if you all looked at their budget sheet and their ask. Couple conversations about kind of the appropriate ask or asking for what they needed. And so landed on some personnel and then supplies as well. So they are asking for medications. If you look at the description, they weren't quite sure what the pricing would be, if you know that kind and so they asked for an amount. We did have that conversation about specifically if they needed more, you know, getting access to different kinds of funds, those kinds of things. I think, Dan, I know you may say this, but I'm pretty sure you're providing TA or you have talked to them. Maybe I'm speaking out of turn, but this is definitely a program that is in the planning stages, which is why their budget sheet is a little vague. Dan, go ahead.
Yeah, basically we have intent to provide TA, but have not connected
Okay.
yet for any meetings. And I just emailed the commander a little bit back and forth and we got a meeting set up. If there is a chance for them to adjust their budget sheet in some way, I'm thinking like the 20,000 for medication is probably a little too low than what they would need over the 2 years, but I can understand. I think they said they're 18 beds, so I can understand they're trying to estimate the demand for something brand new, and it's very, very hard to estimate. But I think I would just recommend if there is a chance, they could err on the side of allocating more towards that and saying maybe we will serve more people with the program, and then they're not short during the 2 year period.
Okay, that's great feedback. Grant?
Yeah, I sort of had a similar response where I was confused by the amount of personnel given the lack of really a plan, it seems like. And so like I get that we do planning grants, but a planning grant is generally, you know, for project management and those types of things to establish a plan. It seems like here they're asking for personnel for a program that hasn't yet been designed, which makes you question how they know the personnel that is going to be needed for it. And then also, I think I actually had in my note that they need. It's good to hear that they potentially have TA because I have that they need TA because there was just a lot of comment about you know, collaboration with their drug court program and really I think the two are very separate and should be very separate. And so yeah, I'm hoping that they can provide a bit more of a framework of what they plan to do, especially given that it's still, I know it's not a huge compared to some of the others, but it is still $100,000. So
Yeah, that's great feedback. And we can definitely connect with them and encourage them, Dan, to, I know they said they set up a meeting, but encourage them to meet with you, particularly to your point, Grant, with the best practices and that kind of standards of care and developing that framework. So okay.
Is there a chance for them to request more on the supplies for injectable buprenorphine because it looks like they didn't ask for nearly their allocation, so there's like more available if they would have asked for more.
That's a great question. I don't know. I off the top of my head, I don't know what that process would look like. We can provide that feedback for sure. And I will see if there's any sort of avenue that we can take, just because if it's an objective process, right? So if there is an avenue that you open up for one applicant, you have to open it up for all, right? And we did have a number that requested below their allocated amount. And so let me see if I don't know if that's something that we can do. I will say, and I also have spoken with the person who did this application. I think they are in need of some TA in terms of the cost and what they can get with this kind of money and things like that. So I don't know, Dan, but I can look into it if that's something that you think is worthwhile, if we're able to do that after the fact. So
yeah, I guess I imagine if they implement, they could potentially use sublingual buprenorphine, which is cheaper if they do run out of funds for the injectable. Yeah, that may work. Sometimes that's really hard for the small jails also with their infrastructure to do a daily dispense.
Okay. Okay. And definitely, Dan, part of that, our feedback will be to continue to connect with you for sure, if you're good with that. So just volunteering you all over the place today. Okay, any other comments or feedback for Lake County? Okay. Lane County, they are an existing program. They did apply last time as well. They do have a treatment provider. And their request is medication. That is the bulk of their request, with some administrative costs as well. So any questions, comments, feedback for Lane County? Okay.
I think it looks
Um,
pretty good. Sorry, I think it looks pretty good because the cost of the injectables is pretty high, and I think they have WellPath. I'm not totally sure, but I think they have an internal medical provider already. So it's nice to see them augmenting their ability to care for our patients without us covering the kind of HR and staffing. Thanks.
That's good feedback. Thank you, Moxie. Okay, Lincoln County. They are an existing program. They do have a provider. They also did note that they do, this is also, I believe, true for at least one other applicant, that they do provide telemedicine for MAT services in facility and post-release. And so they did note that as part of their program. And then they do have a personnel request, which is their treatment provider, as well as the bulk of their ask being medication. Any questions or comments or feedback for Lincoln County? Mitch.
I just wanted to say a positive that I really do appreciate the inclusion of alcohol medications for alcohol use disorder being mentioned as part of their plan.
That's fantastic. We'll make sure we give them that feedback as well. So thank you for pointing that out. Okay. Malheur County is an existing program. They are a returning applicant. They do have a provider. They are this is one of the other few, if you look, they did ask for equipment. This is for the office remodel specifically to make it so that they can store medication. So this is kind of one of the other equipment asks that we have. Very in line with what's been asked previously. Just wanted to note that they do have a treatment provider, and the bulk of their ask is medication. Any comments or questions for Malheur? Okay. Marion County, also existing and a returning applicant. They do have a provider, and they specifically say they wanted to secure funding to increase treatment accessibility, which is why they're seeking funds this time. The majority of their request without the admin is for medication, which is what they specifically say in their application. So any comments or questions on Marion County? Dan.
Yeah, so I wouldn't say there's an established best practice yet about the use of weekly injectable buprenorphine in jails versus the monthly. But I tend to recommend to jails that they more heavily invest in monthly, especially close to release. And I believe this application was all weekly. I don't know if they also might do some monthly or get monthly from another source, but just might recommend they think about monthly being a good practice, and it will be more staff efficient for them if the patient is staying incarcerated with them for weeks and weeks, and then it's also advantageous to the patient at release to get a monthly injectable. But the weekly is cheaper. So there's some trade-offs, and it might be interesting to talk about in like a TA context. I just think there's some value to also having monthly if they would be interested in modifying or like reallocating toward that later.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, it does look like in their actual request, they just note the weekly dosing. So yeah, we can ask them or provide that feedback to maybe look into the monthly dosing as well. Moxie?
Yes, one of the challenges that I've seen sometimes, not all the time, with Sublocade monthly injections compared with Brixadi, which is the weekly, or they have multiple options with Brixadi. They're both buprenorphine and extended release, but one of the challenges with the monthly that I've seen is it can take 4 or 6 months of injections to reach steady state in the blood, where the level of bupe doesn't drop at the end of the month right before the next injection is due. And so there's a little vulnerability if it's been very short treatment with monthly and they get released right around the time it's due, but it's not given again. I think it would be pretty amazing to do, 2 or 3, if you have the chance, weekly Brixadi injections and then switch to a monthly, whatever brand. I don't have any financial ties to either of the companies, but that's Braeburn and Devere. But I guess I can get kind of perfectionistic, and I don't work in a jail, and understand that sometimes people get released at random times in the middle of the night, and you don't always know how long they'll be there. And in that case, a monthly would make perfect sense. So, thanks.
So it sounds like, and Dan, I think that was you with a thumbs up. It sounds like kind of a mix of the two. The weekly and the monthly is the way to go. I think maybe the feedback is just ensuring that it's best practices and how we're doing that. So, okay, so we can provide.
It's hard to say it's best practices quite. It's like expert opinion level guidance. Yeah.
Expert. Okay. All right. We'll make sure it's that we don't use best practices, but maybe should be looking to doing this. Okay. Perfect. Any other questions or comments on Marion County? Okay. Multnomah County, they do have an existing program, and they are a returning applicant. They do note that they want to expand medication provisions that include methadone treatment and medication security. And so their ask is they kind of have a little bit of everything. They did ask also under the housing and facilities, they specifically asked for a room modification. And then equipment, they asked for security cameras. So just wanted to note those. And then for the supplies, the medication and the safe storage ask as well. And then they do have direct services as well as personnel in their request. Grant.
So this is another one of those where I see a lot of personnel costs and not a lot of meds. I mean, $1,000 for meds given the population here. Was really hoping to see injectables on this when I opened it. But I was also a bit confused. And so Allied Health Services, I mean, that is essentially a personnel ask, right? Because I couldn't tell whether or not they were providing like ongoing treatment services or anything like that, or if that's who they were just contracting with for the methadone continuation. So I don't know if you know that, or that's a question.
No, but we can get clarification on that. If that's something that you feel is
I-
necessary, we can get,
Yeah.
oh, sorry, Dan, go ahead.
I do believe they're contracting with Allied or CTC for the methadone services. And methadone is very cheap. So sometimes if you're not seeing medication costs on these budget sheets, a jail might just say like methadone or sublingual buprenorphine is cheap and we're not bothering to put it on the budget sheet. Whereas like injectables we're always seeing because they're very expensive and I could put 100 injectables on there and that's like the whole budget that we saw.
Okay. Mitch?
Yeah, I just had one question. Are the site or the room modifications, are those the same that were in the plan last year, or are those additional sites? Because I remember they had a pretty like big site build out in the last year's grants.
Yeah, I don't know if they are. I do know that they had a very similar request. We can clarify that it's not double dipping, if that makes sense. So we can clarify, we can get clarification on how much work was done or if any, and then kind of going forward what the difference is. That's a great catch though. So thank you for that. We can make sure that that's not the same request twice, for sure. Melanie, did you have something? Did you have your hand up? I don't know if you had. I don't know if you can, if your volume or anything is. Nope. No, still can't hear you. So, okay. Okay. Any other comments or questions on Multnomah County? Okay. So this is Norcor. Norcor is one of our combined applications. It serves Wasco, Hood River, Sherman, and Gilliam counties. And so their allocated funds are all of those counties put together. They are an existing program and they are a returning applicant. And so their request was personnel. They did ask for medical software. This was kind of the reason why we didn't flag this one as staff is because the description was very similar to the medical health records, the electronic health records that we approved last time. We thought it was in line with that. So if you all think otherwise, please let us know. Medication, they did ask for a little bit of training and travel, and then administrative costs as well. And I do want to note, I believe, and just to make sure, I believe on maybe one of the budget requests, they did go over their allocation. If you are looking at it, just make sure that the correct one you're looking at is the 303. Any comments, questions, clarifications for, or feedback for Norcor? Grant.
Again, I kind of the same question of just, what is their census? And then, um, it just seems like a lot of clinical staff. And, maybe that is appropriate given the number of beds they have. And then with the computer, I was a little confused by this one. Is this for the software as well? Because right now, what I understand is it says, that the computers are old and can't currently run MAT-based tracking and medical software. I mean, I will say that seems like a facilities issue. I'm guessing if it can't run that and if they're old, they probably need to be replaced. Sometimes I feel like these grants are sometimes like, what are the things on our wish list that we've been meaning to replace for a while, and how can we tie it into this grant? And so I just wanted to make sure, because also $3,500 for a computer is not, that's a significant amount for a computer. And I know it's only a $10,000 line item in a $300,000 budget, but that's what stood out to me.
Yeah, no, we can definitely get clarification on that for sure. Yes, that makes sense. Remind me, Grant, what was your first comment? Oh, your personnel. That's right.
Yeah.
So we did ask for clarification on this, particularly the nurse and the nurse supervisor, because initially the descriptions were the same. And in that, when they also the FTEs and the percentage were very similar as well. When they reallocated funds, that percentage for the nurse supervisor decreased quite a bit. And so we did get clarification on the differences on those two positions in particular. So we kind of had the same not issue, but kind of the same, we flagged it as well. And so, got clarification. We can get further clarification if you'd like on any other personnel, but we did flag those in particular. So. Okay, any other comments, questions on Norcor? Okay. Oh, go ahead, Mopsy.
I don't really know the Dalles area. That's where it's located, I think. Is that right?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, so I don't really know that area well, but I would imagine that it may be very difficult to get these kinds of specialists in that area. And so staffing may be more expensive than it would be in Portland or in Eugene. And also, if it's a very small jail, even if their census is low, it could be quite an investment cost to equip them, especially if they don't have ongoing medical care of any kind. So I just think about rural jails and rural prisons in kind of a different way, is because their overhead costs will be pretty high to start. And I also, it's also, I think, worth asking whether there are any for-profit corporations that are involved in the provision of healthcare in these different jails when we look at the personnel costs. Because when some of it's going to profit and it all came from government money to start, that's really helpful to know. Thanks.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you. Orion, you unmuted and then muted again. Did you have a comment before I get to Dan?
I don't think I did. Norcor is rural. I think what Moxie said about, difficulty of staffing is a challenge. And I know they dealt with that with just needing to refill some medical positions for a while that were there. It is one of our larger jails rurally because they serve as kind of a regional hub, as you said. And then they also serve for a lot of other groups. I don't know how that comes into funding, and maybe I'm just getting too into the weeds to do that. But I know they also deal with like federal marshals, some there too. And, they'll deal with transports when people are coming in and out from far regions, in the far east of the state.
Okay, thank you for that context. Dan?
Yeah, I was mostly just going to comment about it being the ADP, I think, is around 125. So it's not a tiny jail, and I do TA for them. So their program design is to do both sublingual buprenorphine dispense as well as use injectables. And so there's certainly like nursing time needed for the dispense process.
Okay, thank you for that. Any other comments or questions about Norcor? Tillamook, they are an existing program. They're also a returning applicant. And let's see what their requests are. They kind of have a bunch of requests. They do have some personnel. The bulk of their requests is in direct services. And they also have a request in housing and facilities. So this is one of those specific requests that we were talking about earlier that we got your feedback on. This is one of them. And then they also have supplies and administrative costs. So any Moxie?
I have some apprehension about using funds for addiction for housing, and housing is really important for people to recover. And yet I think when we look at this kind of situation, I feel concerned about kind of the amount of the total cost of a grant. Like if we've got $286,000 90,000 is for housing and facilities. It seems like a lot, and it's important to be holistic and to offer support. But I just feel concerned that, like the actual healthcare delivery, because it's not covered, and the 1115 waiver was supposed to help with that, and now I think it's not, from what I hear. I feel concerned about using that large of a chunk, like I guess about a third of the funding for this county for housing. The other issue is if we don't use that money, could the state hang on to it and use it the next time we give out grants, or would it be returned to the general fund because the budget may be even tighter in the future? We can't really predict that. I don't think too well. And then the other part is, I think someone mentioned earlier that patients would go to recovery housing, which in my experience is fraught with difficulty in some ways, because the houses will often have a house leader who is a patient in recovery who will decide who to drug test, and they will rapidly evict people and interpret medical tests when they have no training. So I just wonder, are we setting people up to go to subsidized housing where they will potentially be sort of treated with sort of a medical malpractice by someone who's not a medical staff member at all? And do these people eventually have plans for employment? Because I think they have to start paying rent within about 3 months or so, is what I've heard. So it's a really complex kind of process with them changing environments. And just like I wouldn't want to subsidize like a for-profit healthcare system that's not totally focused on addiction services delivery, I also wouldn't want to subsidize housing that presents certain types of hazards to our patients. Thanks.
Thank you for that feedback. Orion?
So I appreciate Moxie's comments. Mine are kind of, I guess, the other side of that I think, I know Tillamook pretty well, and they are getting their medical services through Advantis Health. Felt like this was a really good application that was building upon the program that was currently there. And a lot of the housing treatment, like Helping Hands, specifically are reentry focused housing that have worked on a lot of that. They're also the ones, they have much bigger areas, but in an area like Tillamook that's pretty rural, I thought that they did a really good job kind of supplementing what was existing in the current treatment and kind of building upon that to make a successful program.
Yeah, to your point, they do mention Helping Hands in their budget request. They do provide math kind of on where they got the price per unit, and then do say it's a contract with Helping Hands Reentry, and that includes case management for ongoing recovery and moving towards permanent housing. So that is the kind of overall purpose of when they talk about housing that short term. So
yeah,
Grant?
I think it's more than just transitional housing. It's really kind of that, like you said, the case management and moving towards a more stable process.
Grant?
Yeah, I will say that I mean, I would agree with Moxie that it doesn't make me, obviously working partly my housing is incredibly important to all of this, but this is an MOUD grant process, and it does make me a little uncomfortable given the amount that is set aside for housing in this. And I will say specifically the nightly shelter bed. I think the one, it talks about includes case management for ongoing recovery. And the other is simply one bed reserved for the 20-month period. And so nightly shelters are not a great place to go when you're in recovery. Sometimes it's the only place, and that's better than nothing, but it's not great. It's not long term. Also, it's more expensive than 2 rooms monthly for the same amount of time. And that's a little disturbing as well. unless I'm reading that wrong, it seems like it's $80 for a nightly shelter bed
Yeah.
for 30 days at 20 months is 48,000 when you get 2 rooms at a monthly rate for 20 months is $6,000 less. And so that just also seems very expensive for a nightly shelter bed.
Yeah, no, that is great feedback. We can flag this. I think from what I'm understanding, kind of the first one, right? That recovery case management, the helping hands reentry ask seems to be you all are more comfortable with that one rather than the second one. And so we can flag that second one and get clarification or even flag it and go to the commission with it if needed. So yeah, and no, Grant, your math is right on that. So for the length and the expense and all of that. So we'll flag that request specifically if you all feel like it falls outside of kind of the grant, the purpose of the grant program. We can absolutely flag it and get feedback on it for sure. So Moxie?
Yes, I wondered whether we know the cost of the housing versus the transition services, and they both sound really good. And that Adventist program sounds like it's very well thought out. I've just seen a lot of these things done piecemeal in ways that hurt patients, where they think they're in sober living and they're secure, and then they have a false positive test for cannabis and they get kicked out and start using fentanyl again, and that kind of thing. But it sounds like this is very well thought out and coordinated. And so what Orion shared was reassuring. But I also wonder, could they just rent a couple of apartments if they actually expect to need that? Could they rent like a single room occupancy hotel? Do those exist in that area where they could have like 4 people housed for the cost of what they're looking at? I'm not really sure what the housing costs are like there or the availability. Thanks.
Yeah, we can definitely provide that feedback as maybe potential options other than what they requested. Any other comments or concerns, feedback for Tillamook? Okay. Umatilla Grant counties. So this is our other combined application. And so if you see their allocated funds, it is both of them together, which is why it is the amount that it is. And they are an existing program. Both of them are returning applicant, sorry. And they do have a treatment provider. And then their request is mostly personnel. And then again, just a reminder, this is across both counties in terms of their ask. And so just want to reiterate that. They do have a medication request, and then they do have the administrative ask as well. Any comments or questions or clarification for Umatilla Grant counties for this application? Grant?
I feel like a broken record on this, but I do want to raise the proportion of personnel and Moxie, your comment last time about rural jails is, it's definitely true, and this is one of those, and so I do take that into consideration. I will say again, and maybe this is just how they classify them, but these are all existing positions that it looks like they're using the grant funds to supplement. Which I would want to know how, that is going to work with the roles that these positions already undertake and how much additional work this would be. Because again, if they could cut back on some of that personnel, I think that they could get more of the medications themselves.
Okay. That's great feedback. Moxie?
First, I have to say I'm really impressed that they applied and they're attempting this, given their location. I think it's really wonderful. It's very difficult to find those experts out in that area. So that's great. I wonder if anyone knows, maybe Dan knows or someone else, what the census is like in the jail and whether they already have healthcare services, because maybe they feel like they have to have full-time and maybe they need some technical assistance to figure out how to do this efficiently with less staffing. Because I don't know that you'd really need to have all those staff available all the time, which is the kind of cost I think that we're looking at. Actually seems kind of high, even if all of them were 5 days a week full-time. Thanks.
Dan, do you have a comment on that?
Yeah, I do provide TA for those jails. Just to directly answer the question about ADP or like population, Umatilla jail is close to 150, and Grant County, I think, is around 30. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Orion?
Oh, I had one more thing. Sorry. I
Oh,
was also
sorry.
going to say, I think they have purchased some injectable buprenorphine on the prior grant. That they can use in this future period, or they may have anyhow. So they may be planning to do some treatment basically with medicine they bought previously. And CCS also said they would fund some of that in kind, I think, on the
Yes,
grant,
they
because they
do.
did put
Yes.
less medication costs on there.
Yes, that was a great catch, Dan. They do mention that on their request for medication. So the in-kind part for sure. Orion, did you have a comment or are you good?
In this name of time, just that I think they brought CCS on to start this, or to supplement their existing kind of crisis intervention pieces, and so they do have med staff as well, or medical teams, but that's a different contract. So it seems like, I think that kind of speaks to why it's confusing that they have these existing programs or these existing positions, which were, I believe, funded through their last process or maybe part of EOCI.
Mitch?
Yeah, am I able to offer any insights that I might have from visiting the staff there through some community engagement?
If it provides context to kind of what they have requested,
Definitely.
then yeah, that's appropriate. Yeah.
Okay. One of the things that I guess like I can say as a context that I was a little happy to see when we went, there was one medical assistant and one NP, and that was putting significant stress on the medical assistant because they were getting called in a lot to administer these medications. I think there's a change management issue with the jail medical staff that they were kind of addressing. So I will say in kind of that tone of rural areas who do need these like added supports, this feels like solving an issue that we were hearing, I think, back in May when we visited.
Okay. Thank you for that context. Any other comments or questions on Umatilla? Okay. Union County, they have an existing program and they are a returning applicant. They do have a provider. They are also one of the counties that provides telehealth, so they did mention that as well. And they do have peer support for transitional care. So they do have a personnel request as well as an equipment. This is a medication cart that staff felt was appropriate. If you all have any sort of insight as to whether it may or may not be, that would be helpful. And then the majority of their request is medications. Grant.
I feel bad doing this just because I do appreciate that they've directed so much of their funds towards medications, but $10,000 for a medication card, I will say that it got my attention and I went searching through the internet and I could not find another medication card that costs that much. And so, I'm sure that maybe one out there exists, but they also have, a daily population of 34 individuals. And so I don't know, I guess it just caught my attention. And so I wanted to flag it. But again, I really appreciate they're doing 0% admin and they're dumping almost all of it into meds. So not a lot to complain about. I guess they can get a medication card.
Yeah, I think that's why staff also, we flagged it. We thought it was an appropriate ask just given the grant. The cost was, we didn't quite understand as well. And maybe if any of you all have insight as to why it would be that cost, that would be helpful. Moxie, do you have insight?
Yeah, healthcare can be ridiculously expensive. And for instance, when I decided to start a Sublocade program at a methadone clinic, so we already have all the alarms and the lockers and all that business, and the safe that locks out for a certain amount of time. In a $1 million building, we still had to buy a $2,000 refrigerator that had 2 locks on it behind a locked door, and we had to change access for the badging. For only the people who actually need to pick the medicine out of the fridge were allowed to go in there. Like I wasn't allowed to go in there, but my MA could go in there. It's like the regulations are Byzantine. So I would guess that the cost of the medication cart may be because it's controlled substances that you have to put in it. And some of it may even be refrigerated. So if you've got Sublocade, you may have to have a refrigerated cart that you can then go plug in and recharge. I'm just guessing. And it may have to have 2 locks on it instead of 1. It may have to have like really limited access so that people can't just like share a code or something. It's really so specialized, I would bet. So when I looked at the range of costs, it says $750 to $5,000. And then if you add in controlled substances, you get more like 3,600, 22,000, 24,000 costs for like something that you could wheel around a facility. So I would bet they probably looked at a model for the cart. They may actually do well to find out if all the jails could get together and do a group order, like a bulk order, and distribute these carts throughout the state. They might be able to get 2 carts because if they're going to have more than one MA or something, they might want to have 2 carts because if you only have one that has a cart, then you're kind of in trouble. So just some tips, but I would bet they looked at it. It's expensive. Thanks.
That's perfect. Thank you for that. This is why we have this group, because Grant and I are the same, where we were like, this doesn't make any sense. And so that's perfect context for a cost for a medication cart. So thank you, Moxie, for that context. Any other comments or clarifications needed for Union County? Okay. Washington County, this is Washington County, their sheriff's office. They do have a transition center, which is next. This is a little bit different from Clackamas County transition. The Washington County Transition Center, they're community corrections, and this is the sheriff, and so they are 2 separate entities. So anyways, this is the Washington County jail, like the sheriff's office. And so they're an existing program. They are a new applicant. They did not apply last time for funds. They do have a program though. And then their request is the entire allocation is for medication. So any comments or anything, any feedback for Washington County?
Do
Moxie.
we think, oh, sorry, do we think that they could be buying enough medication that there's a risk some of it could expire? Because if it's injectable, there's a storage issue, expiration, and then if it expires, you have to just waste it.
Okay.
Does anyone know? I mean, it's probably a very big facility with a lot of demand, and there's like the SUD rate in incarcerated groups is, I think, about 60%, and I think it's like 10 or 20% have OUD, and so it makes sense that they would spend a lot. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah, and we can
love
ask,
it.
well, no, we can ask about the expiration as well, just to make sure, because I think you're right, this is one of the higher asks, but they are also a pretty big jail, a pretty big facility. So sorry, any other comments or anything? Sorry, Dan.
Sure. I would just say like the best thing they could do is is order in batches over the 2 years, and that also helps to not have too much in one of those fancy fridge setups
Perfect.
as well. We're happy to connect with them if they want any assistance with getting the extended release buprenorphine and the systems and all that. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for that. Okay, Washington County Transitional Services. This is an existing program. It is a new applicant for us. It is part of the expanded eligibility that came out of the 2025 session. And their requests are, they do have a large personnel requests. They do have some requests in supplies. And then they do have a training that they requested, which staff flagged. We just want to make sure that the training that they are requesting to attend is appropriate for this kind of a program. And so we just wanted to make sure, we just wanted to see what you all thought in terms of what they're asking for and whether or not it fits. It does fit. I will say this, I'm pretty familiar with this, the training that they are asking for. It is appropriate for community corrections. It absolutely is. We don't know that if it is appropriate for this program itself. Does that make sense? So we kind of need some clarification on that. Any comments otherwise on this application?
I do think the training looks like a great idea. I just looked at what it stands for as Cognitive Behavioral Intervention Substance Abuse Curriculum from University of Cincinnati. That looks like a really good option. It's like a 4-day training. I think that's a solid foundation. It's nice to get everyone trained on the same program, because if everyone's using different approaches, like there's this thing called MRT, like moral recognition therapy. And sometimes you can get people who are trained in that, and then other people who are trained in kind of patient-centered, more humanistic models, and they all can just have really conflicting approaches. So I like the training.
Okay.
I think the medication, the amount is probably kind of low because if they have some leftover from before, that could work. But if they're planning on offering injectables, and that might be $1,000 a month, then you're looking at treating 44 patients for 1 month, roughly. And that's pretty short. So I just wonder, could they maybe reduce the personnel costs and increase the supply costs? Because counseling without medication is not effective. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. And especially feedback on the training. We appreciate that. Grant.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I support our transition centers to the extent that, they get people out of custody. I was, again, a little confused by for one, these are all listed as existing positions again, so I would be curious how they're using, in other words, how they are using these funds to focus that on getting people engaged in medically assisted treatment, and yeah, exactly how they would go about doing that, because what this seems like is that they are covering 22% of their staffing for their transition center under this grant. And I guess I don't fully see the connection to the MOUD. So if someone has insights.
Yeah, no, we can ask for clarification on let me make sure that this is correct. What you're asking kind of is how their personnel is being used as it relates to this specific program, not to the transition center itself. Is that kind of what you're asking?
Correct, because any transition center, right, they're going to be focusing on getting people into services, including substance use treatment, and so that is just kind of bread and butter. And so, like,
yes,
what is the addition, I guess, here?
Gotcha. Okay, we can make sure that that's clear. Mitch, you had your hand up. I want to make sure you.
That was
you
the
wanna-
exact question Grant was asking.
Okay.
So we're good.
Perfect. Okay. Dan?
I have limited experience in coordinating some clinical care, like hospital to this transition center for patients on medication, and just like keeping in mind that I don't believe they have any nursing staff, so like any administration of the medications, and if they're like taking a patient to get methadone from a facility, which they mentioned, like that will be on the staff basically to do it, and it can be substantial. It's hard for me to like really assess without knowing the number of patients that they have on buprenorphine or methadone, but it's an enormous amount of staff time if they have, like, let's just say they had like 10 patients on methadone and they all need transports on some interval. Maybe they're getting a week of take-home bottles every time they go, but it could certainly be a lot of staff time. So it's hard for me to assess, but I do recognize it's like they don't have medical staff to do that. So that's why those those counselors are on there.
Gotcha. Thank you for that context.
On that note, would it be possible to clarify whether or not these folks are doing the transportation themselves?
Yep.
Because then they also had like what was it, $24,000 for bus passes.
Yep.
And in that they mentioned, yeah, to go to treatment or to go to work. And so,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we can absolutely ask for that, whether or not they're actually transporting as well. We can get that clarification for sure. So, okay. Any other comments or feedback for Washington County Transitional Services? Okay. Yamhill, they're an existing program. They're also a returning applicant. And they asked, all of their ask was in direct services with treatment provider services. So any comments or feedback for Yamhill County? Grant.
And I guess I was just a little confused reading through the application because it was very focused, I thought, on detox. And I guess I was I'm just trying to find the section where I was confused. I don't know. Now that I'm looking at it again, my note is not necessarily making sense. So ignore that comment.
Okay. I'm not quite sure what, not quite sure what you're referring to. But if it comes up or you remember, we can go back for sure. Dan.
Just kind of, again, like we could provide them technical assistance because they mentioned new expansion of their program with extended release buprenorphine. I think they used the phrase rapid induction to extended release buprenorphine at some point, or I wrote a note on that, and we could absolutely talk about how to do that.
Okay. We can let them know of that for sure.
Yeah, the budget is an example of like a budget that doesn't really tell us anything.
Do you have any sort of feedback in terms of what else they should provide?
Well, it's hard to really say anything, I thought, based on the budget, because it's just isn't it just one item?
Yeah, I think so. I'm pulling it up.
Yeah,
We did have to ask them for clarification because they initially didn't provide any sort of narrative or anything like that. So we did have to ask them for clarification. So they did turn in another budget sheet with quite a bit more detail in the narrative section of their ask. So I don't know, I'm not quite sure what copy you're looking at, Dan, but they do provide some more detail which I can
It's-
give if you don't have that copy.
It's still the one line item though, right? Under
Yes, yeah.
medications.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, it looks like because they have a contract healthcare provider, and it's probably the provider said this is what it's going to cost, and then that's what's on the sheet, but it doesn't tell us anything about the program design or like how much of the money is going to what.
okay. Is there, what could we ask them for in terms of feedback then for operations, with this ask? Like, what else could we?
Sure. I mean, I think it'd be useful to see at least some categories of like what are they spending on injectable buprenorphine, and then what are they
Gotcha.
spending on staff positions, and then
Okay,
anything else they want to break out of the lump sum would be useful to look at.
gotcha. Okay. Okay. Mitch.
Yeah, I just wanted to say one, I really appreciate the specific cycles of data review that they did call out in that, but I do echo the same questions. I think for that amount of detail, like it is surprising to see the lack of as it relates to the staffing and other costs.
Okay, we can absolutely get that information for sure. So, any other comments, feedback, questions for Yamhill County? Okay. So this next slide is for public comments. So this is when if there's any members of the public that are in this meeting, this is when you have the opportunity to speak if you would like to. If you can just raise your hand, unmute yourself. If you do have something to say, just please keep it to about 2 minutes in length. And then just a reminder, the grant advisory committee and staff, we're not allowed to answer any questions. So it's literally just comments. So if you do ask a question, we aren't able to engage. So if there's anybody that would like to speak, this is your time to do that. Okay, I'm not seeing. All right, I'm not seeing anybody. So that is the end of the presentation. Thank you all so much for your feedback, for just providing context. We will make sure that we take note of this, that we provide it to the applicants, and that we take these recommendations to the commission in November. I do know that this has been a bit of a long meeting. I recognize that. We would like to get one more thing from you all if possible. So in the application process, we asked on question 6, we asked specifically for the applicants to provide time-based goals across the length of the grant cycle. And these questions or the answers were kind of all over the place. And they, some of them were great answers and some of them were not great. And we realized kind of going through it that we didn't really provide enough guidance or detail in terms of what we were actually looking for. And so we're going to try to take this question at question 6 and apply it in our quarterly reporting. And so does everybody have access, first of all, to an application where they can look at question 6? It doesn't matter which one. I just want to make sure you have access to the question. And I can read it. It just says, describe your program's specific and achievable time-based goals to increase access to medication for opioid use disorder within your correctional facility. So it's how are you going to increase access? And I think we didn't provide any examples and we didn't provide any sort of benchmarks that they potentially should be looking at. And so do you all have any feedback in terms of like how we can capture this in a different way throughout the life of the grant? I think they struggled with kind of figuring out 2 years from now, this is what this is going to look like. Mitch.
This might just be influenced by some of the answers I saw that I liked to this question, but I think calling out for quality improvement initiatives, informing future funding needs, so of that nature, I think will both get people thinking about like what they need to collect, but also why that's important.
Okay. That's great. Grant?
CJC does semi-annual reports on these like it does the other grants.
Yeah, yeah, we do.
So I mean, I think as far as like more more guidance, I think asking for like the cadence of goals to be set alongside of that, and that way when they're doing the semi-annual review, it can check like they said by this point they would have this and this done, and it's an opportunity to say like what's been wrong or where are you at with that, and I think it would allow for good benchmarks. But I also do think that laying out some examples of what some might be or what some benchmarks provided and by like Dan or others that provide technical assistance, what some good benchmarks might be would be helpful as well.
Okay, thank you so much for that. Moxie?
Yes, thanks. I think about these things a lot because in medicine, people use metrics all the time to count things that we don't have control over. We would love it if 100% of patients with addiction wanted to quit and got medication. But I think that planning for that kind of engagement is can often kind of discourage everyone on the staff when they find that not that many people want to do it. So I think that if you look at people who are free living, it's up to about 5% per year that have addiction who actually look for help and want treatment. So 5% is pretty low. In jails and prisons, it may be a lot higher engagement because they're looking to improve their lives and they don't have a lot of other distractions and things to support them. So I think, probably Dan knows a lot about kind of what are the rates of engagement that are pretty common. But I think that if you aim at something like successfully doing screening and brief intervention and referral to treatment expert on 90% of your new adults in custody, that would probably be a good goal, 80 or 90%, just given that some of those people are going to leave before anybody on medical staff or counselors even sees them. So there should be a little room for them to leave without help. And being able to meet with patients and do motivational interviewing, which is all about what the patient's goal is rather than say, I won't think someone should quit fentanyl, but maybe their goal is to like continue using it until they get back surgery. We're going to be working at cross purposes. So if my goal is to control them, it'll fail. But I can engage and at least support them in looking at the impacts of what they're doing. So trying to measure something that's within our control is good for morale and good for patients. Thanks.
All right. Thank you. Dan?
Yeah, I appreciated this question, and I tend to advise jails to think about a care cascade framework where they measure their booking volume and then the percent of screenings they did. So maybe they do health screenings on 80% of people booked, and then the positive opioid use disorder rate. So maybe that's 20% have opioid use disorder and got a screening. And then the initiation onto medication. And those are like really great metrics for them to try to track and then improve over time. And it is a huge challenge for jails to do those kind of metrics. Like a lot of jails I work with are not getting those and be very difficult for them. Better, more possible if they have a strong health record and some like centralized tech support basically for the health record to be able to track stuff like that. And if they don't, it's really hard for them to get data like that. But that's like the framework that I propose is bookings, screenings, and then into your MOUD program
So if we kind of, along with like kind of Grant's comment and then with the engagement with Moxie and then your comment, Dan, if we kind of shape this question and in that cascading way, whether or not it's data or a narrative or room for improvement, if we did it along with kind of when they knew we were going to be. So right now it's like 6-month increments is when we would get that information. And so basically in January and July, right? Or we can do spring and fall. Continue to ask those questions and kind of measure the improvement or the barriers as they continue. Is that kind of what I'm hearing? But focus on kind of that engagement front end part of the program. Is that sort of?
Yes, I would. So I would certainly focus on the front end part because
Okay.
the jail release transition to community data collection is terrible. And
Okay.
we had a
Okay.
chance to improve it with Medicaid waiver, which is not going to happen soon anyways. And without Medicaid continuity, it's so difficult to find out what happens to those individual patients post-release. Like you need a team of researchers at multiple sites inputting data to a central, like we did this in collaboration with Clackamas County, paid for on a federal grant, but there's just no way. I don't usually expect local counties to be able to do that very easily without a research partner and like paying a research partner to do that.
Okay.
So internal to the jail, just understanding your number of bookings, your number of completed screenings, your positive opioid use disorder rate of the screenings, and then how many of those people got onto your medication treatment. Those are like the key metrics.
Okay.
I would be a little worried about I don't think we ever asked the grantees to do that when they applied, and I would not want to say that we want robust data like that from them. But that's excellent if they're able to obtain some or all of those metrics.
Yeah, we can also kind of shape it. And so it's because we understand kind of the difficulty of the data collection piece with this, we can shape it to where, here is kind of the benchmarks that you should be meeting, on this and this and this. What are some barriers? What are some issues? What are some, things that you're encountering in keeping this data? So we can kind of create a question or create something to track that takes into account kind of that difficulty of them having that data for sure. I think, yeah, you're exactly right. This isn't something that we have communicated to collect. I think we're just trying to get a good idea of how these programs are doing through the life of the grant cycle. And we didn't do a great job of doing that with this question. And so we kind of want to make sure that we capture this in a way throughout, maybe we can do it on the reporting end throughout the grant and just get a good idea of where they're at.
Yeah, I want to highlight Deschutes County's application and response to question 6 because it was almost exactly this care cascade where they say, screening, we want to get screening going fantastically, and then we want to get initiation going fantastically. So they're a good example of like they have the idea for what data they want to get.
Okay. And I saw Mitch clap his hands, so that's a good template for us to use for sure. So okay, that is all I have. The next steps for this. Orion, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't want to belabor this. I think well said. I like speaking from epidemiologic terms, like the data is really lacking. And I like how Dan framed that with the care cascade, but being really careful not to overburden the jails now with these data that they just don't have access to. I just want to highlight too that it's going to be a little bit different with the addition of the transition centers. And kind of their process, but I'm assuming that you're kind of expecting that or expecting theirs to be
a little bit different.
Yeah.
We'll try to figure out a way to capture all of it. But yeah, no, that's a great point. So Dan?
I just wanted to also mention, and I think Rachel, I've appreciated you joining the group on some occasions, but the meetings that Lisa Shields facilitates that includes like opioid settlement and my team represented and CJC and others. Comagin Health has some role in evaluating a piece of this. They might be more focused on jails where we're doing technical assistance, but I think there's like an interest in how do we evaluate the work going on in the jails that both CJC and Comagin and the settlement board like all have an interest in. So I just thought I'd bring that up.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you all for your work today. I do want to take just a quick second. I had quite a bit of staff help me with this presentation and kind of getting all of this together. So I just want to acknowledge them and tell them thank you. This is truly a team effort here with these presentations and getting all of these applications analyzed. So I want to recognize them and say thank you to them. You all, thank you so much for your input, your feedback, for being here today. I do want to say that sometimes when we turn out these applications with all of this information, we get really nervous about the level of engagement from these groups and whether or not they're looked at and analyzed. And this group is amazing with your feedback and just your attention to detail. It makes this process so much better. So I really appreciate the effort and all of that you all put in for this meeting. Next steps, we will take your recommendations and feedback to the applicants and give it to them, and then prepare a presentation for the commission it's a Monday. So typically our commission meetings are on Tuesdays. It's a Monday this time. It is virtual, so if you do want to tune in, you can. And it's on the 24th. So, and then hopefully contracting and we get funds out and we get going. So Dan.
Another question, sorry, about the potential for supplementals or additional, and actually I have like triple questions. So potential for a supplemental I'm curious about, and there's some jails I see indications that this is not completely funding the actual costs of their MOUD. I know Multnomah County is like braiding funding. I believe Jackson County Jail is braiding funding. I'm curious if it's the larger jails where the grant is not supporting them enough. So I'm curious about supplemental or jails that missed the chance getting in, especially because this was a 2-year period. And maybe I'll remember my other piece of it, but that's the first piece.
Yeah. So the supplemental, the way that it typically goes is we tend to get contracting out and kind of let everything settle in terms of the amount that goes out. And then it's up to the commission in terms of what they want to do with any leftover funds. So we will at some point in the near future, they kind of get to decide. There is an option within the OARs for this grant to have new people be able to join. So that is an option should they decide to do it. But ultimately, they're the ones that get to pick in terms of what to do with supplemental funds. So I don't have an answer today. I do know there will be obviously some funds available, but when it does or if it does happen, we'll definitely update you all for sure.
Yeah, and I'm happy to connect with the commission or anyone that wants to talk about it. There's at least one jail I know that I feel like kind of missed the window, or they could be ready soon to apply possibly. And so I think it'd be valuable if we offered an on-ramp in the next, like before the next 2 years goes by. And then the supplemental thing, like the other topic is just that the funding is a lot less like per year than in the first round of this, which I was aware of. So it would be good if CJC could get some feedback from the grantees on like how close does this come to covering their costs, or are they shrinking programs that they started last year because there's less funds available, or finding ways to braid funding. I think that's just something that we should think about in this 2-year period, or is there a way to add funds to the pool somehow?
Yep, absolutely. We can reach out and ask that question for sure. Moxie?
Yes, thanks. I really appreciate working with all of you. I've met you so many times over the years, and it's wonderful to see people like you invested in doing this in your spare time. So it's pretty fantastic. Thanks for coming. I wanted to say that I looked around for a couple of different conferences, and I don't know if this is a good one, but it looks really interesting. It's called RISE, a conference for addiction, mental health, and justice innovation. So it's focused on incarcerated people. So allrise.org is the website, and their next conference is in July of 2026. And it says they had 7,000 attendees at their last one. So I thought that might be an interesting one for some of the jails to look at as far as training. Thanks.
Okay.
They might
Thank
want to
you.
leave their training budget vague about, a few options.
Yep.
Who knows?
Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. Ryan?
Just to add on to Moxie's comment about RISE, I sent a PO there last year. Our mental health court staff has taken our specialty court there now 2 years in a row. And they've had nothing but great things to say about the conference every time. And we plan on sending more again this year.
Yeah, okay. Thank you for that. Yeah, we'll definitely recommend that if it's appropriate. Yeah. Okay. Enjoy the rest of your, hopefully, I can't tell if it's raining or not, but stay dry, maybe, question mark. And thank you all so much. I'll give you an update with, if and when the commission makes their decisions, and obviously give you an update if there's opportunity for a supplement around as well. So enjoy the rest of your week. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
We'll see y'all.
Bye.